All right, it is February 10th. It's now 8:30 Central, so we're going to get started with our weekly Zoom meeting. Today, what we're going to end up doing is I'm going to go over a quick overview again, just of the deadlines and timelines, and a couple of must things that you must do. Then I've got three questions that were sent in that I'm going to talk about regarding crop insurance and SCO, just to hopefully shed some clarification on those products and how they relate to your ARC and PLC decision. And then lastly, what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to briefly talk about generic base and how you can end up still getting generic or commodity program payments, so ARC and PLC payments, if you plant covered commodities to generic base acres. Generic base acres, as many of you know, are the old cotton base. We'll step through how that works. So the first thing I want to end up pointing out is people can email questions into us at the Farm Bill webpage or to my email account that's on the screen, and we'll be sure to answer them individually, and we'll use some of the common underlying themes in our next webcast. The other thing that I do want to remind people is that we do have deadlines coming up very quickly. We have the February 27th deadline where landowners have to choose whether they want to reallocate their base acres or retain their existing base allocation. The next decision also is on February 27th. That's the yield update. Remember, with the yield update, that is one decision that you will definitely want to end up doing, because it allows you to pick the higher of your existing yield versus a new yield based on what you've ended up getting over the last 5 years. And basically what you're allowed to do is pick the higher of the two numbers on a crop by crop and farm by farm basis. So there really is no downside risk. Now, the one thing about the yield update, it will only improve PLC payments under this farm bill, but it would potentially provide some additional payments in future farm bills. So regardless if you're going ARC County all the way across the board, you're going to want to consider doing that payment yield update. The next deadline, I actually don't have it on the screen, is going to be the crop insurance deadline. It's sandwiched right in the middle between the base acre reallocation and yield update decision and the ARC and PLC decision. March 16th will be the crop insurance deadline. That's where you'll have to purchase your traditional crop insurance, your revenue protection or yield protection, and then also your SCO and stacks products will be purchased at that time. On March 31st or by March 31st, producers will have to make a one-time decision to enroll their farms in either ARC individual or on a farm by farm and commodity by commodity basis, choosing PLC or ARC. One thing that I will remind people again is that that decision is for 5 years. However, you still have to enroll in those programs annually. And the 2014 and 2015 enrollment time period is going to be April into the summer. Again, there's two things that I really want to highlight as far as what producers need to end up looking at doing. Producers or landowners need to end up doing. The first one is that yield update. There is no downside, and you can pick and choose on a commodity by commodity and farm by farm basis. You can see the criteria. You compare it to that CC yield on your Form 156 Easy that you can get from FSA, and essentially you can either choose to keep that existing yield or update it to 90% of your average yield for the 2008-2012 crop year. So it's something where there is no downside to making this decision. You just have to get into the FSA offices and make it. One thing I will also point out about the FSA offices, they are going to get very, very busy over the next 2 months. So I strongly encourage people to make sure that they make their appointments and end up being able to end up be cognizant of the time that it's going to require some of these offices to process the number of program elections and decisions going forward. The next one that I kind of classify as another no-brainer is you have to end up making a program election. You do not want to get defaulted. If you get defaulted by not making a selection as far as ARC or PLC goes, You will not get any payments under 2014, and you are going to get defaulted into PLC for 2015 and beyond. So again, you want to make sure that you're picking one of the ARC programs or PLC so that you don't end up getting defaulted, because you will forego all those 2014 payments if any are triggered. The last one that I'm going to talk about before I get into the questions is what some of the key considerations should end up being when you're selecting your commodity program. There's kind of two different trains of thought that you can look at. The first one is, are you looking at managing risk? The second one is, are you looking at maximizing payments? And those two will kind of lead you to potentially two different answers. The first one with basic or with risk management, your base acreage reallocation decision should try to more closely align those base acres to planted acres, thus providing some additional coverage. The next one, when you look at making your program choice, so ARC, county, or PLC, what are you protecting against? Are you protecting against the risk of price collapse and a year-over-year substantially lower prices than those reference prices? Or are you more concerned about shallow loss or providing a complementary product to your ARC county or your traditional crop insurance through ARC county? If you are looking at maximizing payments, your base reallocation decision is going to be made based on increasing the likelihood of those payments or maximizing potential payments over the course of the 5-year farm bill. There's kind of two different decisions that you can make on the maximizing payments. First of all, we know more about 2014 and a little bit more about 2015 than any other year. So there's a good chance that you might want to end up front or considering those payments more than 2016 through 2018. Although you do still want to end up getting that or factoring in those end years as far as being able to make sure that you're getting or looking at potential payments for all years of the farm bill. But those front ones are going to be the ones where we're going to know more about the potential payments than the future years. The other one that I do want to end up talking quickly about is marking your average prices. Again, these are based on marketing year farm level prices across the U.S. for corn, sorghum, and soybeans. The marketing year runs from September 1st to August 31st, whereas the marketing year for wheat runs from June 1st to May 31st. This has a couple of ramifications. For example, for corn and soybeans, most of your marketing is going to occur from September until January, or the first 5 months of the marketing year. So what prices are during that time period is going to have the biggest impact on what marketing your average prices are. And to tie that back to the previous discussion on payments at the front of this farm bill, since we're going to be making our program election for 2014, already knowing where prices have been, there's a real good chance that we can end up looking at having a very good idea where those market year average prices are going to end up being for 2014. The other thing that I will point out is for PLC, if you choose to go in the PLC program, past market year average prices do not matter. It only matters what market year average prices are from 2014 to 2018, whereas ARC County or ARC Individual, both past and future market year average prices are very important. And that's to do with how those Olympic averages are calculated. I encourage those that missed the second discussion or webcast discussion to go back and take a look at that information because it outlines some of the calculations as far as how market year average is calculated. These are some of the past market year average prices that you can see for ARC County based on the rolling Olympic 5-year average. We do have some higher prices built into that Olympic average relative to where they are today. For PLC, we're looking at some price projections that are put together from FAPRI, USDA, and the Congressional Budget Office. Again, if you think the prices are going to be somewhere close to these, it'll impact where your decision is going to be. Or if you're concerned that prices might go substantially lower, you might want to end up looking at potentially going into PLC. Before I start talking about generic base, there was a couple of questions that I did want to clarify. The first one was, can traditional crop insurance still be purchased if I enroll in ARC? And the answer to that question is yes. Traditional crop insurance is available. It is something that is completely separate from what your decision is as far as commodity programs goes. The only one that you can't end up purchasing is that new product, the supplemental coverage option, or SCO. If you enroll in a farm in ARC or acres in ARC, you cannot purchase that SCO product. There was kind of a follow-up to that question, and it was, should I still purchase crop insurance even if I signed up for ARC and PLC? And you want to make sure that you are absolutely purchasing crop insurance. ARC and PLC are not replacements for traditional crop insurance. So if you purchase revenue protection or yield protection, you want to make sure that you're still using those products to end up providing in-season price protection. ARC County, if you look at the bare facts on it, only protects about 7% of revenue, given that you have to, it'll trigger payment if you have a decrease in revenue greater than 14% or down to 86% of the benchmark, but it's also capped at that 10% band, so 86 to 76%. So it's really only providing 7% revenue, and it pays on 85% of base acres. So it's something where these commodity programs are not designed to replace traditional crop insurance. You want to make sure that you're definitely still purchasing your crop insurance. When you look at PLC, it's only protecting against price loss. It has nothing to do with yield or revenue. So again, you want to make sure that you're using these commodity programs in conjunction with your crop insurance, not as a replacement. That is not advisable from a risk management standpoint. The next one that we had sent in to us deals with SCO, or the supplemental coverage option. There seems to be some confusion around this product. The one thing that I will say is, if you are enrolling acres or farms in ARC, you cannot purchase SCO. And given how these deadlines are set up, this is going to potentially create some issues. The first one is we have to end up purchasing this product on corn and soybeans by March 16th, which is before you actually make your program election. So I strongly encourage you, if you are thinking ARC or considering, or ARC is the direction you are leaning, not to end up purchasing SCO on those farms or acres, because there's some stiff penalties. What SCO ends up doing is it sits on top of your traditional and conventional crop insurance, and it follows the underlying insurance product. So your underlying insurance product provides yield protection. SCO will provide yield protection. If your underlying insurance provides revenue protection, SCO will provide revenue protection. And essentially what it'll do is it'll go from wherever your conventional crop insurance stops up to a maximum of 86%. So if you're purchasing 75% revenue protection, the SCO product will cover from 75% to 86%, or 11%. If you are only purchasing 60% conventional crop insurance, SCO will cover from 60% up to 86%, or 26%. Now again, SCO is a crop insurance based product, so this decision is made on a year-to-year basis. Again, it's only available on PLC, so that it's going to provide benefit if you are in the PLC program, not in the ARC program. The other real important thing to end up distinguishing is, obviously, SCO, you do have a premium. The government will end up paying 65% of that premium, but you are still purchasing that. ARC and PLC, the commodity programs, are free to participate in. The last thing I will say about the SCO product is that you have to be careful with how this product triggers. It triggers off of county level losses, not actual farm losses. So if your individual farm is not following what typically occurs in your county, this product does not necessarily provide very good coverage from a risk management perspective. And the two extreme examples of this are, you could end up having a complete wipeout on your farm, and SCO wouldn't end up triggering if your county didn't end up experiencing a loss. The other side to that coin is you could end up having an absolutely fabulous year, and if your county experienced loss, you could still get payment under SCO. So from a risk management standpoint, the effectiveness of the SCO product is really going to depend on how closely your individual farm represents what's going on in your county. What I'm going to do now is we're going to kind of shift to generic base. I'm sure most people know that upland cotton base acres are now going to be generic base, and essentially what it is a direct one-for-one transfer. Whatever you had in upland cotton base acres as of September 30th, 2013 will now be generic base acres. This is fixed. It cannot be increased or decreased, and you cannot add to it, and you cannot reallocate cotton base. Since cotton is no longer a covered commodity, these acres just automatically get transferred over to generic base. The only way that you can end up potentially getting payments under generic base under the commodity programs is if you plant covered commodities on an annual basis to generic base acres. You can end up getting ARC or PLC payments. And one of the reasons why this is such an important factor, particularly in Tennessee, is the fact that we have more cotton base, or what's now generic base, than any other of our primary row crop commodities. You can see in the chart that we have roughly 736,000 generic base acres. If we're planting only about 270,000 acres, that's roughly 470,000 acres that could potentially receive payments if they're planted to another covered commodity. So to give you an indication of how this would end up working, in order to get payments under ARC and PLC, you have to plant a covered commodity on that generic base. And they are attributed across base acres only if covered commodities are planted, and will be treated as base acres for that covered commodity when you're calculating your ARC and PLC payments, if any payment is triggered. The major difference is this is done on an annual basis. So it does matter what you plant each year as to what generic base acres would be assigned to a potential covered commodity. The other thing that I will end up mentioning is if you do not plant covered commodities on generic base acres, you will not get ARC or PLC payments. There's no method to end up attributing it. So if you have generic base or old cotton base that's planted to pasture or another non-covered commodity, hay, fruits, vegetables, you are not going to end up potentially getting any ARC or PLC payments. You have to plant one of the 21 covered commodities in order to potentially get a payment on these generic base acres. The attribution of generic base acres: if you plant only one covered commodity and the planted acres exceed the generic base acres, then the generic base acres are attributed to that covered commodity in an amount equal to the total number of generic base acres on the farm. If multiple covered commodities are planted, and I'm going to step through an example of this, and the total number of acres planted exceed the generic base acreage, then the generic base acres will be attributed to each covered commodity on the farm based on a proportional planting calculation. So how are these calculated? Generic base acres, I'm using an example here where you have base acres as of 2013 for wheat 150, soybeans 250, corn 100, and then generic or old cotton base at 75. In 2014, you planted 200 acres of corn and 250 acres of soybeans. In order to get those prorated base acres, what you'd end up doing is taking the total planted to corn of 200 divided by 450 total planting, which gives you 44%. Then for soybeans, you planted 250 compared to total plantings of 450, or 55%. What you would do is you would multiply those generic base acres of 75 acres multiplied by those proportional plantings, so 44% for corn and 55% for soybeans. And what it would essentially do would give you an additional base acres of corn and 41 base acres of soybeans, for which you would potentially get payments under ARC or PLC. And so just to kind of provide a bit of a summary of how this would end up looking for the 2014 year, you still have that 100 fixed corn base, which is fixed for the 5 years of the Farm Bill, but you would also get for 2014 only potential payments on additional 33 acres, which would bring your total potential payment base acres for corn to 133. And soybeans would be 250 plus 41 would give you 291 base acres that you would end up potentially getting payments for 2014. Now, as you move into the next year, these allocations would change again depending on how your planting is. And that wheat base, since we didn't plant any wheat, would remain with just the fixed component at 150 base acres. So it does matter on generic base acres what you're planting on an annual basis. So it's very important to consider that if you're looking at planting commodities on generic base acres. If you're planting covered commodities, you can potentially end up getting some payments on there. So generic base, they'll be attributed or signed and will vary from year to year depending on what you end up planting. So again, I'm always still a big proponent of making your planting decisions based on relative profitability and to end up making sure that you're maintaining an adequate crop rotation so that you can control fertility, insect, and weed. But you might want to end up considering what you're planting on generic base acres to potentially end up getting some payments under if you're planting a covered commodity. So I just want to summarize again. We have some new presentations up on the Farm Bill webpage, and also some additional Outlook slides on the crop economics webpage. We will still have our next one, or our next webcast on next Tuesday. So I encourage you to attend those. The last one that I will end up mentioning is we do still have, they do have the USDA FSA decision aids. Both the University of Illinois and Texas A&M tools are available to aid you and guide you in your decision-making process as you make your decisions regarding the Farm Bill. With that, we will end up signing off for today. I remind you, if you have any questions, please email us and we will be sure to end up getting back to you. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of the week.